I want to spend a little bit of time talking about exactly what Python programs are. We've been using the PyCharm IDE so long now that we may have forgotten that the Python programs are really just text files. They're just sequences of Python instructions. And I want to just dive in a little bit to look at the range of ways that we can create Python programs. First of all, let's not forget that if we have a terminal or a command line, we can run the Python interpreter and execute commands in the interpreter right here. We can do assignments. S equals a list of maybe some numbers. And this actually turns out to be a really good way for debugging, well, at least debugging our understanding of how Python works. So what is S again? How do slices work? What happens if I make a slice starting at 1 and going to the end? Oh, right, that's what it does. Right, what happens if I give it a range, an index that is bigger than the number of items in the list? Well, we can just go try that out. And see, it doesn't give us an error, it just gives us an empty list. So anyway, having access to the Python command line interpreter is really useful. But what if we want to make a program and we don't have an IDE, we don't have PyCharm? Well, there's lots of different ways to do it. One way is simply to use a text editor. It could be WordPad on Windows. In fact, you can even use Microsoft Word. As long as you create a text file that is in pure text format. You can't use it in HTML format or Microsoft Doc, Office format. It needs to be plain text. So, for example, if you're using text editor on a Mac, you need to change the format from rich text to plain text. And now we can lose all of our formatting. All we have is characters. And we can write a simple method. Right? Let's write a little method called squares. Make this a little bigger. And maybe it takes a parameter, num squares, and simply prints out a loop, prints out a list of a number and its square for the number of squares that we've requested. So let's do num squares of them, but instead of going from 0 to num squares minus 1, let's go from 1 to num squares. So we have to go like that. Put in 4 spaces if you're using a text editor, because Python expects indentations to be multiples of 4. And we can print the index and then maybe its square. And now we can test it out by running squares, say, of 10. Now we've written a Python program. Let's save it. We'll put it into a text file. I'm just going to put it in my temp directory, and I'll call it squares.py. But how do we run it? Well, there's a few ways. First of all, of course, we could load this into PyCharm and run it within PyCharm. But suppose you don't have PyCharm. Well, you can go back to your command line, go to the directory, we have the file, squares.py, and we can run it by just typing in Python and then the name of the file. And sure enough, that will run the program. So that's nice. And if you're on Windows, you can do something very similar. You just have to make sure that Python is in your path. Once we've done this, that's fine, but suppose that we don't want to have to type in Python squares. We want to make this work like a more standard program where you can just execute it by typing it in, typing the name of the program. Well, there's a few ways to do this, and a few modifications that make it more interesting. First of all, if we were to just type in squares.py, we'll get an error saying it's not a command, right? The operating system doesn't know how to run, squares.py. It still doesn't know about it. Actually, let me go / make sure it's in my path, squares.py. There we go. Okay. It actually found it this time, but it doesn't have permission. So on Mac, you have to say that it's executable, not only something that you can read, but something you can actually execute. You can use a change mod command. The easiest way to do this is say that I want the user to have executable privileges on this file. If you want to know more about change mod, you can look up the manual page for it, man change mod, and read all about it. Q to quit. Now let's try and run squares again. And this time it says, well, it tried to run it, but it doesn't know how to run it because the operating system doesn't know how to run Python programs. Instead, there is a way to indicate to the operating system that the file contains Python code. In order to do that, we need to know where the Python interpreter is. In Unix, you can ask where Python is, because we know it's on the path somewhere, so we can run it. We can say which Python, and it tells us that this is the full place that it's running from. So it probably actually also exists in another place, user bin Python. See if it does. Yes, it does. That's actually a quicker way to access it. So what we need to do then is take this user bin Python and insert this at the beginning of our text file, just after the special magic characters #! If we do this on an executable file as the first line, then this will tell the operating system that when it tries to run this file, instead of running it as an executable, it will still instead look for this program, run that program, the Python program, and then feed into it the rest of the contents of the file. Let's save this, and now finally we can run squares, and look at that, it works. That's nice, but this is always printing out 10 squares. Wouldn't it be nice if we had the ability to say how many squares we wanted? Well, in order to do that, we need to, I'd like to be able to do something like, say, squares of 25. Type in a command line argument and have it read that command line argument and use that to indicate how many squares to display. So the way to do that in Python is to use a package called sys. We have to import sys. Once we've done that, then we can get the command line args through something called sys.argv. Let's just print this out when we run it so we see what it looks like. I'm going to run this again. Squares pi 25. It printed out the content of sysargv, and what it is, it's a list with two items. The first item is the name of the program that was run, and the second item is the parameter. So if there is exactly one command line argument, that means you just ran the program. If there's more than one, it means it has some actual parameters we typed in. So we can use that information in the following way. We can say if length of sys.argv equals 1, that is, we didn't pass in any arguments, then maybe we should print out some helpful information to explain how to use it. So we'll say, well, what you're supposed to do, here's the usage, is say squares and then the number of squares. If, on the other hand, you did type in a parameter, a command line argument, sorry, then instead of always just printing out 10 squares, let's use the parameter that we entered. The zeroth one would be the name of the program, and the second one, index number 1, will be the parameter. This is actually a string. We need to convert it into a number, so I'm going to convert it to an int like that. Let's save this. And now, with any luck, we can run squares of 25, and look at that. It actually printed out 25 squares. Maybe only asked for 5 of them. Now we get 5, and if we don't say anything at all, we get the usage. So now we know how to take our nice big Python programs we've been running and package them up so that we can use them as scripts to use ourselves for any kind of manipulation of data that we want, depending on what programs we write.